Hi, grade 12s. We are still busy with the state of the environment. The second last topic is conservation. All right, they did ask, I think it was last year, the year before, at some point, they asked for 8 marks to distinguish between conservation and preservation. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on conservation. In the next lesson, we will look at preservation. Okay, again, the definition is this first point. So I suggest you highlight this in your textbook. Conservation refers to the sustainable use and management of our natural resources, such as water, the air, wildlife, and our earth deposits, the minerals. All right. So basically, what the goal of conservation, the point of conservation, is to make sure that we manage our resources in such a way that future generations will have access to the resources as well. We must manage them in such a way that we do not overexploit them, that we leave them intact for future generations. Sustainable use means that future generations will also have access to them. All right. So what does it involve? It involves the official supervision of our natural areas. Okay, so we're looking after our natural areas, and our natural areas will include any resources that is found in that area. So it includes the vegetation, the plant life, in other words. It includes the soil, the animals, the rivers, any water sources that might be there, any resources, minerals, any resources that is found in that natural area, so that we can protect them through wise management, managing them in such a way that they are protected. Okay, we already said that any human activity causes pollution. The fact that we are alive, the fact that we are breathing is causing pollution. When stuff has to be produced for our consumption, it is going to create pollution. Human activity causes, we go to the bathroom, it causes human waste. We throw away the packaging, the plastic straws. Any human activity causes pollution and overutilization of the environment. Now we spoke about the overconsumption. We are consuming too many resources to satisfy our needs, and if we're not careful, it can mean that future generations will not have access to certain resources. So conservation is very important to make sure that we look after our resources, that we don't overexploit them, that we don't overconsume and overproduce, so that future generations can also have access to these resources. All right, so your conservation applies to both renewable and non-renewable resources. Some people think that it is only our non-renewable resources that has to be managed carefully, but also our renewable resources have to be managed carefully. All right, with the renewable resources, it means that we are not going to consume them faster than what they can be replaced. All right, remember, renewable resources are those resources that nature can replace. We can't replace them, nature can replace them. So in other words, when we harvest the maize, we're going to plant the seeds and nature will grow new maize. When we fish, we take out some fishes, it is important that we leave enough fish behind so that they can do what nature does. Mommy and daddy fishes will do what they need to do to make more baby fishes so that future generations can also have fish to eat. All right. So when it comes to our renewable resources, we are trying to make sure that we are not consuming them faster than what they can be replaced. And even with the renewable resources, it is important to remember that nature will renew itself only if enough of its environment stays behind. Okay, so the environment that animals and plants and stuff you will find them in, the environment must be healthy. Otherwise, renewable resources are unable to renew themselves. So conservation is also important with our renewable resources. In terms of our non-renewable resources, obviously this is a more serious issue. Here we have to make sure that enough resources are left behind so that future generations will have them as well. Okay, remember, non-renewable resources are those resources that nature cannot replenish fast enough. Okay, things like our minerals, they are non-renewable. However many diamonds are there, if we've taken them all out, it is going to be finished. There's nothing we can do to help nature to make more diamonds. Same with coal, the fossil fuels, coal and oil. It has been created by nature over millions and millions of years. It is not something that we can just give nature an instruction and say, okay, make us more coal. It is something that takes millions and millions and millions of years. So obviously those will be our non-renewable resources. So because it's not renewable, the aim here is to make sure that we leave enough of them behind for future generations as well. All right, because they cannot be regenerated. If we look at the different conservation areas in South Africa, now first of all, South Africa is signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is an international convention that different governments of different countries attended. And because we signed the agreement that was reached at this convention, that means that 10% of our land area and 20% of our marine biodiversity, so the sea, the ocean, should have been conserved by 2010. Okay, now in South Africa, we did not quite meet our quota. By 2011, there was only around 6% of the land surface area that was under formal conservation through the system of national and provincial protected areas. Okay, so this is something that has to come from the government. All right, where does conservation happen? How do we make sure that conservation happens? When we establish a national park, like the Kruger National Park, that is a conservation area. All right, there's trans-frontier conservation areas that stretches across different countries. Botanical gardens. Here by us on the West Rand, we have the Walter Sisulu Botanical Gardens. It is a conservation area because we are not allowed to pollute there. We are not allowed to remove any plant life or any pick up anything. Whatever is there, it must stay there. We can't pick up little things to remember our trip. We can't pick up a rock. We can't remove anything from the area. Okay, that is what conservation means. Okay, we do have marine reserves as well. Okay, it's where I'm trying to think of one, but I can't remember the name now. Okay, it's in Natal. There is one in Natal where it's a national and a reserve, a game reserve, but it's bordering on the sea. So in that marine reserve, you won't be allowed, for example, to fish. Now, you cannot fish. You cannot pick up shells on the beach. It's a marine reserve. It's a conservation area. All of our World Heritage sites are conservation areas as well. We discussed the different World Heritage sites in chapter 13 when we did the tourism. Okay, biosphere reserves, reptile and butterfly sanctuaries, we've got those as well. And then any buildings of special architectural or historical interest, they will all fall within conservation areas. Okay, there's different aspects to that we need to remember when we talk about conservation. Just one thing, make sure that you write conservation and not conversation, right? It's a spelling mistake, but it's a gross spelling mistake that's going to cost you marks because conservation means something different than conversation. Okay, so be very, very careful here. All right. Now, the first thing to remember that when we do conservation, when we declare a certain area as a conservation area, there's also always an opportunity cost. All right, when they, for example, declare a green belt in a residential area, okay, where there's a green belt, that means that we cannot build buildings on it. Okay, so there is green belt areas in residential areas where there will be a piece of land where nobody's allowed to build. They can't build houses on there. They can't put a road through there. The roads must go around the green belt. Obviously, that has an opportunity cost for the people that is there because now the road could have gone straight through, but now because there's a green belt area, the road has to move around it. So it can increase the journey to work for the people who live in that residential area that needs to move beyond this green belt. All right. In Johannesburg, close to UJ and Wits, there is a green belt area. There's a conservation area, big park where nothing can be built. It's a natural area. It's supposed to stay a natural area. So when you travel through the city, there's no road going through it. You literally have to travel around it. All right, so it does create an opportunity cost for the people that use the roads and now have to drive further. All right, then externalities often also happens. Okay, so if there's a road that leads to the nature park, for example, Kruger National Park, okay, Kruger National Park in our country is very big. It's a very, very big area. And in order to get there, you drive through many different areas. It's rural areas. So you're driving through farmland. So obviously, because the road now goes to the Kruger National Park, it goes through some of the farms. Okay, on either side of the road, there will be farms. So for the farmers, there is a negative externality in terms of the noise. Traffic makes noise, especially in peak hour traffic when there's a lot of cars moving around. Obviously, they're going to have the noise to deal with in terms of the traffic. The noise might impact, for example, on the amount of milk that their cows give. If the noise is upsetting to the cows, then obviously that is going to be a negative externality. The farmer is going to suffer the consequence of his cows actually giving less milk. All right. Also, it causes air pollution. Okay, remember any traffic, any car that is driving, cars generate gas. Out of the exhaust gases are released, toxic gases are released into the environment. So the more traffic there is, the more air pollution there will be as well. And obviously the air quality in the area is going to decrease. Now, if the park wasn't there, people wouldn't be driving there. All right. So it does impact negatively on the people that live in that area. It can also increase criminal activities because the tourists come. There's a lot of tourists that goes. The Kruger National Park is one of the top tourist attractions in our country, and criminals can smell out a tourist a mile away. They know the tourists come with expensive cameras and foreign currency and lots of money and stuff. So obviously criminal activities increases because they target the tourists. All right. And then lastly, our self-interest has a short-term horizon. People always think about themselves. The market will only consider themselves. Private costs, private benefits. So obviously we cannot leave conservation entirely to the market forces because that is going to cause externalities. All right, people are going to make wrong decisions because literally they're only thinking about themselves. They're not thinking of the impact of their actions on others. They're not thinking of the impact of their actions on the environment. All right. So it is going to mean that there is going to be externalities and the market might make a wrong decision that is obviously very difficult to reverse. Once a decision has been made and the damage has been done, obviously it is very, very difficult to reverse the damage that has been done. Okay, we look at conservation of stock. All right. If our resources that is used in excess of their capacity to reproduce themselves, renewable resources. Okay, I'm specifically talking about renewable resources here. All right. If we are using them faster than what they are able to reproduce themselves, obviously there's going to be shortages. All right, because if we cannot produce enough, because we are consuming very fast, okay, we are using them faster than what we can renew them, we are eating the food faster than what we can grow the food, for example, then it's going to mean that the supply is going to be inefficient. We are unable to produce enough food for everybody, and that scarcity is going to cause prices to increase. All right. Now, the minute that prices start increasing, that is going to decrease the demand, right? Quantity demanded will decrease as people try and find substitutes instead, okay? The more substitutes there are, remember, the more elastic your demand is going to be. All right. So if our resources are becoming scarce because we are just consuming them faster than what we can replace them, prices will increase as a result of scarcity. And as prices rise, obviously people are going to, rather than paying the higher prices, they're going to see if there are substitutes available that they can use instead. All right. Now, when the market reacts in this way, it helps us to conserve both our renewable and our non-renewable stock. Because if we search for substitutes, that searching for the substitutes relieves the pressure on our resources, the scarce resources. And because we are finding substitutes, we are not focused on using that particular resource, for example, anymore, because we have now found alternatives. All right. So that goes for our renewable stock, like trees, like agriculture, and our non-renewable stock, like minerals. All right. But what is very, very important these resources are only renewable if the demand decreases in time so that enough resources are left behind to make sure that the environment can recover. All right. In terms of our fishing stock, for example, now I've used this example before, right? If we overfish, okay, like we have done in the past, we have been overfishing for many, many years, which means that certain fish species are under immense pressure. So if you want to buy that specific fish to eat, it is very expensive. So instead of buying the expensive fish, people switch to alternatives. Yeah, they find a different species of fish that is cheaper, so they'd rather buy that one. Okay, and if that happens in time, and enough of that, whatever fish is scarce, enough of them are left behind in nature, then it means that there's enough resources for renewing the resource, right? So if we, for example, I don't know, hake is like oversupply, right? But let's say there's a specific species fish A, right? It is very scarce. People have overfished. We've eaten fish species A all the time. There's very few of them left, and now it becomes very expensive. People are going to switch rather to fish species B. They're going to eat fish B instead because it's cheaper. All right. Now, if we have decreased our demand on time, and we have left enough of species A in the ocean, there's enough mommies and daddy fishies from species A to do what they do to make more baby fishies, then obviously we can resurrect the resource. Now we can replenish those resources because it's renewable. All right. But if we've overfished fish species A almost to extinction, and now we realize it's very expensive, so we buy fish species B instead, but it is too late, and we left not enough fish species A, not enough mommies and daddies of species A is left behind, then nature can't take its course and the resource cannot be replenished. Right, then it's too late to fix the problem. Okay, so conservation has to be concerned basically with limiting what is harvested, limiting to what we exploit, limiting to what we are taking out of nature to make sure that the stable stock levels are maintained at a minimum level, to make sure that enough mommies and daddies of fish species A is left behind so that it becomes renewable. All right. Before it becomes a problem, we should limit what is harvested. All right. In South Africa, we've got like 31 different protected wilderness areas. And in terms of fish species specifically, we do a lot. They really police this. They've got different scales. Fish, they must weigh a certain amount before you're allowed to remove them. There's a little scale thing. It looks like a stencil. And if you catch a fish and it falls through the hole, they say it's too small. You have to return it. It's a baby fishy. It needs to grow up, become a daddy fishy and do what nature does, right? We need to remove the older ones and leave the younger ones behind. So we have lots and lots of rules and regulations that applies to fishing, for example, because our fishing is under pressure as it is. Okay, in terms of water conservation, the last thing for this lesson, so South Africa is seen basically as a water scarce country. Our rainfall, our average rainfall, annual rainfall is below the average of the world. And also the rainfall is very distributed very unequally around the country. So there's certain areas in our country that have sufficient water and it rains often enough and it rains enough. And then there's other areas in our country where water is really, really scarce. Okay, so internationally, our country is basically on the threshold as what is known as a water-stressed country. Okay, we are a water-scarce country. We, more often than not, our water is always under pressure. We're always here in winter. How we have to be careful and conserve water. Don't fill the bath, don't wet your garden, whatever, save water where we can because we are a water-scarce country. Okay, so the government obviously has to take appropriate measures to make sure that we make provision for the times when water becomes very, very scarce. All right, this is when we build the dams. Okay, we know that very often we have droughts. We've just came out a year ago, 2 years ago, out of the most severe drought since like 20, 30 years ago. Okay, we've had a very, very severe drought where literally in the Western Cape, people had no water. Okay, there was literally no water. All right, because it didn't rain for such a long, long time. All right, So during the times when it is raining, we have to make sure that we are able to collect that water and store them for the times when it doesn't rain and water becomes very, very scarce. All right. So in South Africa, we store water in the large water reservoirs, like the one behind KHS, near the Barkosa. And also we've got dams all over the country. We haven't built any new dams recently because it is not very environmentally friendly, okay? But in the dams, we are basically collecting the water, all right? Because what happens is when it rains, the rainwater goes into the rivers and the rivers run into the dam. The rivers run into the sea, right? So once the water reaches the sea, it becomes salt water and we can't use it anymore. So what we do to prevent the water from running into the sea is we will stop the flow of a river by building a dam. Okay, so all the river water will go into the dam. The water is collected in the dam, so the river doesn't flow on and let the water go into the sea. All right, our dams, the water levels in our dams are closely monitored. As I said, specifically in winter, as part of the news, when they announce the gold price and the rand dollar exchange rate and the whatever, the price of maize and whatnot. During the winter, they will also announce how full the dams are. Now they will say the Vaal Dam has got 100% capacity, this dam has got 80%, this dam is only 20%, whatever, because they're monitoring how much water we have. Because the water in those dams is the water that we rely on in the times when it doesn't rain. Okay, obviously in rainy times, then it rains again, the rivers run into the dams and the dams fill up. But during winter, when it's not raining, we use the water in the dam, so the levels of the dams are decreasing as we use the water. As in Gauteng, for example, our water comes from the Vaal Dam. All right, so the more water we use, the lower the level of the Vaal Dam is going to go. In summertime, when it rains again, then the dam fills up again. All right, but provincial governments will always monitor the dams in their provinces to make sure that, or to know when there's going to be a crisis, if they see the levels in the dams are becoming too low, they're obviously going to introduce water restrictions and ask people to not wet their gardens, in the heat of the day, to rather only allow them to water early in the morning or late at night or not at all, depending obviously how scarce the water is becoming. But water conservation is something in our country that is extremely, extremely important because we are a water-stressed country.